A bargain well met. Arlington, 1921. Eleanor Gibson awoke to find the engagement ring of Sergeant Patrick Doyle inexplicably adorning her finger, its cool metal a stark reminder of promises unkept. Please let me know if this table of contents meets your approval. If so, you can issue the command, and I will proceed with Chapter 1. Chapter 1. The Unbidden Ring. The chill of the Arlington morning seeped through the thin curtains, painting the room in shades of gray. Eleanor Gibson stirred, a familiar ache settling in her joints, a constant companion these last few years. Her hand, instinctively, went to her left, tracing the smooth, unfamiliar curve of metal on her ring finger. It was there again. The ring. Solid, heavy, undeniably present. Gold, with a small, dark stone she couldn't quite identify, even in full daylight. It wasn't hers. It had never been hers. She sat up, pulling the worn quilt around her shoulders, the movement sending a sharp twinge through her left shoulder, a souvenir from the influenza that had swept through the hospital in 18, leaving her weak and breathless even now. Her gaze fixed on the ring. Sergeant Patrick Doyle's ring. A ring she'd last seen when? The memory flickered, elusive, like a moth in a darkened room. A field hospital, the acrid smell of antiseptic and blood, the constant moans of the wounded. A hurried, whispered promise. But that was impossible. Patrick Doyle was gone. Lost to the mud and the madness of the Somme. 3 years prior. A telegram, stark and brutal in its brevity, had delivered the news. Missing, presumed dead. The words had echoed in her mind, a hollow, relentless drumbeat that had nearly consumed her. Yet, here was his ring, nestled on her finger as if it belonged there, a cruel mockery of a future that had been ripped away. Eleanor swung her legs out of bed, the floorboards cold beneath her bare feet. The small room, sparsely furnished with a narrow bed, a rickety washstand, and a single, worn armchair, was her sanctuary, her refuge from the ghosts that haunted her waking hours. She'd taken it after leaving St. Elizabeth's, the sprawling mental hospital where she'd spent months battling the shadows that had threatened to engulf her after Patrick's death. The doctors had called it melancholia, a fancy word for a grief so profound it had shattered her world. She walked to the washstand, splashing cold water on her face, the shock momentarily clearing the fog in her mind. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman older than her 32 years, her face etched with lines of worry and exhaustion. Her eyes, once a vibrant blue, were now clouded with a perpetual sadness, framed by dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights. Her auburn hair, once thick and lustrous, was streaked with gray, pulled back in a severe bun that did little to soften her features. The ring glinted in the dim light. She tried to pull it off, her fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar band. It wouldn't budge. Panic tightened its grip around her chest, a cold, constricting band. She tugged harder, her breath coming in ragged gasps. It was stuck, firmly, as if it had fused with her flesh. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she gripped the edge of the washstand, her knuckles white. Images flashed through her mind, fragmented and distorted. Patrick's face, young and hopeful, his eyes the color of the Irish Sea. The feel of his hand in hers, rough and calloused, yet strangely comforting. The muddy trenches, the relentless barrage of artillery fire, the screams of the dying. She closed her eyes, willing the images away, but they persisted, relentless and vivid. She remembered the day he'd left, the bustling railway station filled with tearful farewells. He'd pressed a small, velvet box into her hand. "Wait for me, Ellie," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll come back for you." Inside the box, nestled on a bed of satin, had been a different ring, a delicate silver band with a tiny pearl, a symbol of their tentative, hopeful love. She'd worn it every day, a tangible reminder of his promise. After the telegram, she'd locked it away, unable to bear the sight of it, the weight of its unspoken question. But this wasn't a promise of a future. It was a relic of a past that was supposed to be buried, sealed away with the memories she'd fought so hard to suppress. A knock on the door startled her. "Eleanor? Are you all right?" It was Mrs. O'Malley, her landlady, her voice laced with concern. Eleanor quickly pulled a shawl over her nightgown, tucking her left hand beneath the folds, hiding the ring. "Yes, Mrs. O'Malley. Just a bit under the weather. You've been looking pale lately, dear. You need to eat more. I've brought you some broth." Eleanor forced a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. O'Malley. You're too kind." Mrs. O'Malley, a stout, motherly woman with a heart as big as her bustling boarding house, bustled into the room, carrying a steaming bowl. The savory aroma filled the small space, a fleeting comfort in the face of the growing unease that churned within Eleanor. "Now you sit down and eat this. You need your strength." Eleanor obeyed, sinking into the armchair, her gaze involuntarily drawn to her left hand, still hidden beneath the shawl. Mrs. O'Malley, oblivious to the turmoil raging within her, chattered on about the neighborhood gossip, the rising price of butter, the latest antics of her mischievous grandson. Eleanor listened with half an ear, her mind racing. How had the ring gotten there? Had she put it on in her sleep, a subconscious act of yearning for a lost love? Or was it something more? A sign? A message? A cruel trick of her still fragile mind? The broth warmed her, but it couldn't dispel the chill that had settled deep in her bones. The ring felt heavy, a physical manifestation of the questions that swirled within her. Questions that demanded answers. Questions that threatened to unravel the carefully constructed walls she'd built around her heart. Questions that, she knew, could lead her back into the darkness she'd fought so hard to escape. The ring, a silent sentinel, a harbinger of a past that refused to stay buried, felt like a key. But to what door? And did she dare to open it? Chapter 2. Echoes of the Psalm. The broth sat heavy in Eleanor's stomach, a knot of unease twisting tighter with each passing hour. Mrs. O'Malley had finally left, after extracting a promise from Eleanor to see the doctor, a promise Eleanor had no intention of keeping. Doctors, in her experience, offered pills and platitudes, neither of which could ease the ache that had taken root deep within her. She paced the small room, the floorboards creaking under her restless steps. The ring, still stubbornly fixed on her finger, felt like a brand, a constant reminder of the mystery that had consumed her. She had to understand. She had to know how it had gotten there. Her gaze fell upon the small, cedar chest tucked away in the corner of the room. It was where she kept her most precious belongings, the remnants of a life that felt both distant and achingly familiar. With trembling hands, she opened the chest, the scent of lavender and old paper rising to greet her. Inside, nestled amongst faded photographs and dried flowers, was a small, leather-bound journal. Her wartime diary. She hadn't looked at it in years, the memories it held too painful to revisit. But now, with the ring a constant, burning presence on her finger, she felt compelled to confront the past, to search for answers in the pages of her own handwritten words. She sat on the bed, the journal open in her lap, her fingers tracing the faded ink. The entries were filled with the mundane details of her life as a volunteer nurse at a field hospital near Amiens, interspersed with the horrors she'd witnessed. The constant stream of wounded soldiers, the amputations, the screams, the pervasive smell of death. And then she found him. Patrick. His name appeared, gradually at first, a mention of a Sergeant Doyle, charming Irishman, recovering from shrapnel wounds. Then, more frequently, his name woven into the fabric of her daily life. She'd written about his kindness, his quiet strength, his wry sense of humor that had somehow survived the horrors of the trenches. She'd written about their stolen moments together, whispered conversations in the quiet corners of the hospital, shared rations under a star-filled sky. She read about their growing connection, the slow burn of a love that had blossomed in the shadow of death. Her words, raw and honest, painted a picture of a woman falling deeply, irrevocably in love with a man who was living on borrowed time. She turned the page, her heart pounding in her chest. There it was, the entry from the day he'd proposed. He took my hand, his eyes so full of love and fear. He said he didn't have much to offer, just a ring he'd carried with him through the trenches, a promise of a future he wasn't sure he'd have. It wasn't the silver ring he'd given me before, the one I wear every day. This one was different. Gold, with a dark stone. He said it had belonged to his grandfather, a soldier in the Boer War. He said it was a symbol of courage, of resilience, of a love that could survive anything, even death. Eleanor closed her eyes, the memory flooding back with a force that stole her breath. She remembered that day, the chaos of the hospital, the distant rumble of artillery fire. She remembered the feel of his hand in hers, the weight of the ring as he'd slipped it onto her finger. But she hadn't accepted. Not then. She told him it was too soon, that they were living in a world of uncertainty, that she couldn't bear the thought of losing him. She'd promised to wear the silver ring, the symbol of their tentative hope, until he returned. And then, if he returned, the next entry was brief, brutal. He's gone. Sent back to the front. I don't know if I'll ever see him again. The following pages were filled with her anguish, her fear, her desperate prayers for his safe return. Then, the final entry, written in a shaky hand, the ink blurred with tears. The telegram arrived today. Missing, presumed dead. My Patrick, my love, is gone. Eleanor closed the journal, her hands trembling. The ring on her finger felt heavier than ever, a tangible link to a past that was both agonizingly clear and shrouded in mystery. She remembered him slipping the ring onto her finger, but she hadn't accepted it. She'd refused. So how a sudden thought struck her, a chilling possibility that sent a shiver down her spine. Had she put it on after the telegram? In her grief-stricken state, had she sought solace in the ring, a desperate attempt to hold onto the last vestige of their love? Had her mind, fractured by loss, simply blocked out the memory? The thought was disturbing, unsettling. It suggested a level of instability she'd been desperately trying to overcome. It hinted at a darkness within her that she'd thought she'd conquered. She stood up, her legs shaky, her mind reeling. She needed to talk to someone who had known Patrick, someone who had been there, someone who could help her make sense of this impossible situation. There was only one person she could think of. Sister Mary Agnes, the head nurse at the field hospital, a woman of unwavering faith and quiet strength who had been her confidant and her rock during those dark days. Sister Mary Agnes had been with Patrick when he'd been brought back from the front, his body broken, his spirit. Eleanor grabbed her coat, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had to see Sister Mary Agnes. She had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The ring, a silent, insistent presence on her finger, was a summons, a call to unravel the mystery of its appearance, and, perhaps, to finally confront the ghosts of the psalm that still haunted her dreams, and now, her waking hours. The weight of it was a promise, or a threat. She wasn't sure which. But she was certain she couldn't ignore it. Chapter 3. The Sergeant's Scars. The journey to St. Anne's Convent, nestled on the outskirts of Arlington, was a blur of hurried steps and anxious thoughts. Eleanor clutched her coat tighter, the wind whipping around her, mirroring the turmoil within her. The ring, hidden beneath her glove, felt like a burning coal against her skin. St. Anne's was a haven of peace, a stark contrast to the bustling streets she'd left behind. The stone walls, covered in ivy, exuded a sense of timeless tranquility. The air was filled with the scent of roses and beeswax, a calming balm to her frayed nerves. She was ushered into a small, sparsely furnished parlor, the only decoration a simple wooden crucifix hanging on the wall. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass window, casting colorful patterns on the polished floor. Sister Mary Agnes entered, her presence filling the room with a quiet authority. She was older now, her face lined with wrinkles, her hair completely white beneath her wimple. But her eyes, a clear, unwavering blue, held the same warmth and compassion that Eleanor remembered. "Eleanor," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It's been too long. What brings you here after all these years?" Eleanor hesitated, her throat constricting. How to explain the inexplicable? How to articulate the fear and confusion that had driven her here? She took a deep breath, pulling off her glove, revealing the ring. Sister, I don't know how to explain this. This ring, it belonged to Sergeant Doyle. Patrick. But he's gone. And I don't understand how it got here. Sister Mary Agnes's gaze fixed on the ring, her expression unreadable. She reached out, her fingers gently tracing the contours of the gold band, the dark stone. A flicker of something crossed her face. Recognition? Sadness? I remember this ring, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He always wore it. Said it brought him luck. But I didn't accept it, Eleanor said, her voice trembling. I told him it was too soon. I couldn't bear the thought of losing him. Sister Mary Agnes looked at her, her eyes filled with a deep, knowing sadness. Eleanor, you were both so young, so full of hope, despite the horrors around you. But how did it get here? Eleanor persisted, her voice rising in desperation. I don't remember putting it on. I thought I was losing my mind again. Sister Mary Agnes sighed, a weary sound that spoke of years spent witnessing the ravages of war, both physical and emotional. The mind is a complex thing, Eleanor. Grief can do strange things to us. It can cloud our memories, distort our perceptions. But this is different. It's real. Yes, Sister Mary Agnes said, her gaze unwavering. It is real. And it's a story that needs to be told. A story that I've kept locked away in my heart for too long. She gestured towards a small, wooden bench beneath the window. Sit down, Eleanor. And I will tell you everything I know. Eleanor sat, her heart pounding in her chest. The ring, a silent witness, felt both heavy and strangely comforting. Sister Mary Agnes began her story, her voice low and measured, painting a vivid picture of the chaos and heartbreak of those final days of the war. She spoke of Patrick, his bravery, his unwavering devotion to his men, his quiet longing for Eleanor. He was brought back to us from the front lines, badly wounded, she said, her voice catching. He'd been caught in a shell explosion. His injuries were severe. Eleanor closed her eyes, the images flooding back, the screams, the blood, the pervasive smell of death. She remembered the frantic rush to save him, the desperate attempts to stem the bleeding, the futility of it all. We did everything we could, Sister Mary Agnes continued, her voice filled with a quiet grief. But it wasn't enough. He was slipping away. She paused, her gaze fixed on the crucifix on the wall, as if seeking strength from a higher power. He knew he was dying, Eleanor.
He was conscious for a time.
And he spoke of you. Constantly. Eleanor's breath hitched in her throat. What did he say? He said he loved you. More than life itself. He said you were his reason for fighting, his hope for a future that he knew he wouldn't see. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, silent tears of grief and regret. He asked me to give you this ring, Sister Mary Agnes said, her fingers gently touching the gold band on Eleanor's finger. He wanted you to have it. He said it was a symbol of his love, a love that would transcend even death. Eleanor's mind reeled. He'd given it to Sister Mary Agnes? But how I don't understand, she stammered. I was there. I was with him. I don't remember. Sister Mary Agnes looked at her, her eyes filled with a profound compassion. Eleanor, you were in shock. You were overwhelmed by grief. You were not yourself. She paused, her gaze softening. After he passed, you were inconsolable. You kept repeating his name, over and over again. You were delirious. And then you took the ring from my hand. You slipped it onto your own finger. And you whispered, I accept. I accept your love, Patrick. Forever. Eleanor stared at her, her mind struggling to grasp the truth. She'd done that? She'd put the ring on herself? In her grief-stricken state, she'd accepted the proposal she'd previously refused? The memory, buried deep within the recesses of her mind, began to surface, fragmented and distorted, but undeniably real. She remembered the feel of the ring, cold against her skin, the weight of its unspoken promise. She remembered the whisper, a desperate vow made in the face of unimaginable loss. A wave of emotion washed over her, a complex mix of grief, relief, and a profound, overwhelming sadness. The mystery of the ring was solved, but the pain of Patrick's death, the weight of their lost future, remained. The ring, no longer a symbol of confusion, now felt like a connection, a tangible link to the man she had loved and lost. A reminder of a love that had blossomed in the midst of war, a love that had transcended death itself. But it was also a reminder of her own fragility, of the darkness that had consumed her, of the scars that the war had left on her soul, scars that, even now, years later, still ached with a dull, persistent pain. The ring, warm now, was both a comfort and an unbearable sorrow. What was she to do with this burden, this gift? Chapter 4. Whispers in the Ward. The revelation from Sister Mary Agnes left Eleanor reeling, a maelstrom of emotions swirling within her. Relief that the mystery of the ring was solved, mingled with a renewed wave of grief, the raw pain of Patrick's death brought back to the surface with a visceral intensity. She left St. Anne's, the quiet serenity of the convent, unable to soothe the turmoil in her heart. The walk back to the boarding house was a slow, agonizing trek, each step heavy with the weight of her rediscovered memories. Back in her room, the familiar surroundings offered little comfort. The ring, now a tangible symbol of Patrick's dying wish, felt both precious and unbearably painful. She sat on the bed, staring at it, the dark stone glinting in the afternoon light. She remembered his face, so vivid in her mind, even after all these years. His kind eyes, his crooked smile, the way he'd brushed a stray strand of hair from her forehead. She remembered his laugh, a deep, rumbling sound that had always made her heart feel lighter. She remembered the day he'd left for the front, the fear in his eyes masked by a forced bravado. She'd clung to him, desperate to hold on to him, to keep him safe. He'd promised to come back. He'd promised. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, guttural sound that echoed in the small room. She buried her face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. The grief, buried for so long, now overwhelmed her, a tidal wave of sorrow that threatened to drown her. She didn't know how long she sat there, lost in her grief, the ring a constant, burning presence on her finger. The room grew darker, the shadows lengthening, mirroring the darkness in her heart. A soft knock on the door startled her. She quickly wiped her tears, trying to compose herself. "Eleanor? It's me, Mrs. O'Malley. May I come in?" Eleanor hesitated. She didn't want to see anyone, to face the well-meaning but ultimately useless sympathy of her landlady. But she couldn't hide forever. "Yes, come in," she said, her voice hoarse. Mrs. O'Malley entered, her face etched with concern. "You've been crying, dear. What's wrong?" Eleanor shook her head, unable to speak. She couldn't explain, couldn't articulate the complex web of emotions that consumed her. Mrs. O'Malley sat beside her on the bed, her hand resting on Eleanor's arm, a comforting gesture that brought a fresh wave of tears to Eleanor's eyes. "It's all right, dear," Mrs. O'Malley said softly. "You can tell me. I'm a good listener." Eleanor hesitated, then, slowly, she began to speak. She told Mrs. O'Malley about the ring, about Patrick, about the war, about the grief that had haunted her for years. She told her about Sister Mary Agnes, about the revelation that had brought both clarity and a renewed sense of loss. Mrs. O'Malley listened patiently, her expression a mixture of sympathy and understanding. She didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. She simply listened, providing a silent, supportive presence that Eleanor desperately needed. "It's a heavy burden, dear," Mrs. O'Malley said when Eleanor had finished speaking, her voice filled with compassion. "A love like that, it leaves a mark, a scar that never truly heals." Eleanor nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I thought I'd moved on," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I thought I'd found peace. But this has brought it all back." "Peace isn't about forgetting, dear," Mrs. O'Malley said gently. "It's about accepting, about learning to live with the pain, with the memories." about finding a way to honor the love you shared. Her words struck a chord within Eleanor. Accepting. Honoring. Perhaps that was the key. Perhaps that was what she needed to do. To accept the ring, not as a symbol of loss, but as a symbol of a love that had endured, a love that had transcended death itself. To honor Patrick's memory, not by dwelling in the past, but by living a life worthy of his sacrifice. I don't know how, Eleanor said, her voice filled with doubt. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Mrs. O'Malley smiled, a warm, reassuring smile that reached her eyes. You are stronger than you think, Eleanor. You've survived so much. You've faced the darkness and come out the other side. You have a good heart, a kind soul, and that, my dear, is the greatest strength of all. She stood up, smoothing her apron. Now, I'm going to make you some tea. And then we'll talk. We'll talk about Patrick, about the war, about anything you want. And we'll find a way, together, to help you carry this burden. To help you find peace. Not in forgetting, but in remembering. Eleanor watched her go, a glimmer of hope flickering within her. Mrs. O'Malley's words, her kindness, her unwavering support, were a lifeline, a beacon in the darkness. The ring, still heavy on her finger, felt a little less like a burden, a little more like a promise. A promise of a future, not the one she'd dreamed of with Patrick, but a future nonetheless. A future where she could honor his memory, embrace her own strength, and perhaps, finally, find a way to heal. The tea, when it came, was strong and sweet, and the whispers of the past seemed, for the moment, to quiet themselves, replaced by the gentle murmur of a present, shared with a friend. But outside, the wind was picking up, and the sound, Eleanor thought, was like the distant rumble of guns. Chapter 5. A letter from Amiens. The tea and conversation with Mrs. O'Malley had provided a temporary respite, a brief lull in the emotional storm that raged within Eleanor. But as the evening wore on, the questions, the doubts, the lingering pain returned, swirling around her like the gathering dusk. She found herself drawn back to the cedar chest, to the remnants of her past. She opened it again, her fingers tracing the faded photographs, the dried flowers, the small, leather-bound journal. She paused at a small, wooden box, tucked away in a corner of the chest. It was a box she hadn't opened in years, its contents too painful to confront. It contained the letters. Patrick's letters. Letters he'd written to her from the front, filled with his hopes, his fears, his unwavering love. She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. Could she bear to read them? To revisit the words of a man she'd loved and lost, a man whose voice had been silenced forever? But the ring, a constant presence on her finger, seemed to urge her on. It was a tangible link to him, a reminder of the love they had shared, a love that had defied the horrors of war. She opened the box, her hands trembling. The scent of old paper and lavender rose to greet her, a bittersweet reminder of a time when hope had still flickered amidst the darkness. The letters were tied together with a faded ribbon, their edges worn and frayed. She carefully untied the ribbon, her fingers lingering on the delicate fabric. She picked up the first letter, its postmark bearing the date of his arrival in France. His handwriting was strong and bold, filled with a youthful enthusiasm that belied the dangers he faced. He wrote about the camaraderie of his fellow soldiers, the long, monotonous days of training, the constant anticipation of the battles to come. He wrote about his longing for her, his dreams of a future they might share, a future filled with peace and happiness. She read through the letters one by one, her heart aching with each word. She followed his journey through the trenches, his descriptions of the mud, the rats, the relentless shelling, painting a vivid picture of the horrors he endured. She read about his fear, his doubts, his unwavering determination to survive, to return to her. She read about his love, a love that grew stronger with each passing day, a love that sustained him through the darkest of nights. She reached a letter postmarked Amiens a few weeks before the telegram. Her hand trembled as she unfolded it, the paper thin and fragile. My dearest Ellie, he wrote, his handwriting less steady, more hurried. The fighting has been fierce. We've lost so many good men. I don't know how much longer this can go on, but I keep fighting for you, for the hope of a future with you. I carry your picture with me always. It's my talisman, my reminder of what I'm fighting for. I look at it every night before I sleep, and I dream of you. I dream of holding you in my arms, of kissing you, of building a life together, far away from this madness. I know I haven't been the best at expressing my feelings, Ellie, but I want you to know, without a doubt, that I love you. More than words can say. More than life itself. I've been thinking about the ring, the one I gave you at the hospital. My grandfather's ring. I know you didn't accept it then. You said it was too soon. But I want you to have it, Ellie. I want you to know that, no matter what happens, my love for you will endure. It's a symbol of that love, a promise that will transcend even death. Keep looking at the letters, Ellie. There is more. One that has never been opened. Find it. Eleanor's heart stopped. Another letter? One he'd never sent? What did it mean? She frantically searched through the remaining letters, her fingers fumbling with the delicate paper. She found it, tucked away at the bottom of the box, a small, sealed envelope, her name written on the front in Patrick's familiar handwriting. It was different from the other letters, smaller, thicker. She hesitated, her breath caught in her throat. This was it. The letter he'd never sent. The letter that held what? A final message? A farewell? A secret? Her hands trembled as she carefully opened the envelope, the seal breaking with a soft, ripping sound. She unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning the words, her heart pounding in her chest. The words were written in a hurried scrawl, as if he'd been writing in the dark, under duress. They were fragmented, disjointed, filled with a sense of urgency and fear. Ellie, if you're reading this, it means I'm not coming back. There's something you need to know. Something I couldn't tell you before. About the ring, about my grandfather, about a secret, a betrayal, a debt. I can't explain, it's too dangerous. But you must find the truth. The letter ended abruptly, the last few words illegible, blurred by what looked like blood. Eleanor stared at the letter, her mind reeling. A secret? A betrayal? A debt?
What was he talking about?
What did it have to do with the ring? With his grandfather? The ring suddenly felt cold, menacing. It was no longer just a symbol of love, of a promise. It was something more. Something dangerous. Something that had cost Patrick his life. A wave of fear washed over her, a cold, chilling premonition. She'd thought she'd found the truth, but now she realized she'd only scratched the surface. There was a deeper mystery, a darker secret, hidden beneath the surface of Patrick's death. And the ring, she was certain, was the key to unlocking a truth that could be more dangerous than she could possibly imagine. The key to finding out what really happened out there, in the blood-soaked mud of the Somme. Chapter 6. The Weight of Silence. The unfinished letter, stained with what Eleanor feared was Patrick's blood, lay heavy in her hand. The cryptic words, hinting at a secret, a betrayal, a debt, echoed in her mind, a chilling counterpoint to the love letters she'd cherished for so long. The ring, once a symbol of enduring love, now felt like a dangerous enigma, a Pandora's box she was terrified, yet compelled, to open. Sleep evaded her. The night stretched on, filled with restless tossing and turning, the shadows in her room seeming to whisper secrets she couldn't decipher. The weight of Patrick's silence, the unfinished story, pressed down on her, suffocating her. The next morning, she rose, her body aching, her mind exhausted. The ring, a constant presence on her finger, felt like a lead weight, pulling her down. She knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. She had to find out the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. But where to start? The letter offered few clues, only fragmented hints of a hidden past. His grandfather, a secret, a betrayal, a debt. She decided to start with what she knew. Patrick's grandfather. He'd said the ring had belonged to him, a soldier in the Boer War. Perhaps there was something in his past, some clue that could shed light on Patrick's cryptic message. She went back to the cedar chest, searching through its contents, hoping to find something, anything, that could help her. She found a small, faded photograph, tucked away in a corner of the box. It was a picture of Patrick as a young boy, sitting on the lap of an older man, his grandfather, she presumed. The man was stern-faced, his eyes piercing, his uniform bearing the insignia of a British regiment. He held a rifle in his hand, his posture rigid, unyielding. There was something about his expression, a hint of something that made Eleanor uneasy. She turned the photograph over, hoping to find a name, a date, anything that could give her a starting point. There was a single word written on the back, in faded ink: Pretoria.
Pretoria.
The capital of South Africa during the Boer War. A place of conflict, of bloodshed, of betrayal. A shiver ran down Eleanor's spine. The Boer War. A brutal, bloody conflict, fought between the British Empire and the two Boer republics. A war known for its atrocities, its concentration camps, its scorched earth tactics. She remembered reading about it, the stories of the British soldiers, their bravery, their brutality. The stories of the Boer fighters, their resilience, their desperation. Could Patrick's grandfather have been involved in something dark? Something that had cast a shadow over his family, a shadow that had ultimately reached Patrick? She needed to know more. She needed to find out everything she could about Patrick's grandfather, about his service in the Boer War, about his life in Pretoria. She decided to go to the library, to delve into the historical records, to search for any mention of his grandfather, any clue that could help her unravel the mystery. The Arlington Public Library was a grand, imposing building, its shelves filled with the weight of history. She spent hours poring over dusty books, old newspapers, military records, searching for any trace of Patrick's grandfather. She found his name, listed amongst the soldiers who had served in the Boer War. Captain Alistair Doyle. He'd served with distinction, earning medals for bravery. He'd been stationed in Pretoria for a time, but there was nothing to suggest anything untoward. No mention of any secrets, any betrayals, any debts. She was about to give up, to despair of ever finding the truth, when she stumbled upon a small, unassuming book, tucked away on a bottom shelf. It was a collection of letters, written by a British nurse who had served in a military hospital in Pretoria during the war. She opened the book, her heart pounding in her chest. She scanned the pages, her eyes searching for any mention of Captain Alistair Doyle. And then she found it, a letter, dated 1901, describing a scandal that had rocked the British military establishment in Pretoria. A scandal involving a stolen diamond, a corrupt officer, a betrayal that had led to the deaths of innocent civilians. And the officer at the center of the scandal was Captain Alistair Doyle. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The letter described how Captain Doyle had been accused of stealing a large, valuable diamond from a Boer farmer, a diamond that was said to be cursed. He'd then used the diamond to bribe a local official, securing a lucrative contract for his family's business. But the farmer, desperate to retrieve his stolen property, had informed to the Boer commandos. The Boers, using the information, had ambushed a British convoy, killing dozens of soldiers and civilians. Captain Doyle had been court-martialed, but, due to lack of evidence, he'd been acquitted. However, the scandal had ruined his reputation, forcing him to resign his commission and return to Ireland in disgrace. The letter ended with a chilling observation. They say the diamond was never recovered. They say it's still out there, somewhere, waiting to claim its next victim. Eleanor closed the book, her hands trembling. The weight of silence, the burden of Patrick's unfinished letter, suddenly felt heavier than ever. The ring, a symbol of a cursed inheritance, a legacy of betrayal and bloodshed, pressed against her finger, a constant reminder of the dangerous path she was now treading. A path that led back to the blood-soaked battlefields of two wars, and a secret that someone, somewhere, was willing to kill to protect. Chapter 7. Beneath a Flanders Sky. The revelation in the library left Eleanor shaken, the pieces of Patrick's cryptic message slowly starting to fall into place. The ring, his grandfather's legacy, was not just a symbol of love, but a link to a dark and dangerous past, a past stained with betrayal, theft, and bloodshed. The debt Patrick had mentioned was not merely financial, but a moral debt, a karmic burden passed down through generations. She returned to her room, the weight of her discovery pressing down on her. The photograph of Captain Alistair Doyle, his stern face and piercing eyes, seemed to stare at her accusingly. The cursed diamond, the stolen legacy, the lives lost, it was all connected. She was sure of it. But how did Patrick fit into all of this? What had he known? And why had he been killed? She went back to his letters, searching for any further clues, any hint that he'd known about his grandfather's past. She reread the letter from Amiens, the one he'd never sent, the one that had spoken of a secret, a betrayal. You must find the truth. But what was the truth? Was it simply the story of his grandfather's crime? Or was there more? Something that Patrick had discovered, something that had put him in danger? She noticed something she hadn't noticed before. A small, almost imperceptible mark on the letter, near the bottom, where the ink was blurred. It looked like a symbol. A small, stylized drawing of a bird. She examined it closely, her heart pounding in her chest. It was definitely a bird in flight, its wings outstretched. It was familiar, somehow. She'd seen it before. Suddenly, it hit her. The field hospital. The chapel. There had been a stained glass window, depicting various scenes from the Bible. And in one of the panels, there had been a bird, a dove, carrying an olive branch, a symbol of peace. But this wasn't a dove. It was different. She remembered the chapel, a small, stone building that had served as a place of solace for the wounded and the dying. She remembered the stained glass window, the way the sunlight had streamed through the colored glass, casting a kaleidoscope of colors on the floor. She remembered Patrick, sitting in the chapel, his head bowed in prayer. He'd often gone there, seeking refuge from the horrors of the war. He'd said it reminded him of home, of the small church in his village in Ireland. Could the bird symbol be a clue? A message hidden in plain sight? A reference to the chapel, to something hidden there? It was a long shot, but it was the only lead she had. She had to go back. Back to the field hospital, back to Amiens, back to the place where Patrick had spent his final days. The decision was made. She would travel to France. She would retrace Patrick's steps, seek out the chapel, and search for the truth, whatever it might be. The journey was long and arduous, a stark reminder of the distance that had separated her from Patrick during the war. She traveled by train and by boat, the landscape changing from the familiar streets of Arlington to the rolling fields of France. The closer she got to Amiens, the more vivid her memories became. She remembered the sights, the sounds, the smells of the war, the constant rumble of artillery fire, the cries of the wounded, the pervasive smell of antiseptic and death. She arrived in Amiens, a city still bearing the scars of war. Buildings were riddled with bullet holes, streets were lined with rubble, the faces of the people etched with a weariness that spoke of years of hardship. She found the location of the field hospital, now a quiet, overgrown field, the only reminder of its existence a crumbling stone wall, a solitary marker bearing the names of the dead. She walked through the field, her heart heavy with grief. She could almost hear the echoes of the past, the sounds of suffering, the whispers of hope. She found the remains of the chapel, a small, roofless structure, its walls crumbling, its stained glass window shattered, its fragments scattered on the ground. She stepped inside, the silence deafening. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. She looked around, her eyes searching for any sign, any clue, anything that could help her. She saw it, a small, almost imperceptible mark on one of the remaining fragments of the stained glass window near the bottom, where a bird had once been depicted. It was the same symbol, the bird in flight. She knelt down, her fingers tracing the outline of the symbol. It was definitely the same bird. But what did it mean? She looked around, her eyes scanning the floor, the walls, the crumbling altar. There was nothing, just rubble and dust. She was about to give up, to despair of ever finding anything, when she noticed something. A small, loose stone in the wall, near where the altar had once stood. She reached out, her fingers grasping the stone. It moved easily. She pulled it out, revealing a small, hollow space behind it. And inside, nestled in the darkness, was a small, wooden box. Her heart stopped. She reached into the hollow space, her fingers closing around the box. She pulled it out, her hands trembling. It was old, worn, its surface covered in dust. She opened it, her breath caught in her throat. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a ring. A gold ring, with a large, dark stone. The cursed diamond. And next to it, a folded piece of paper. A letter. Patrick's final letter. A letter that would reveal the truth, the whole truth, about his grandfather, about the ring, about his death. The weight of the box in her hands was the sum of years of loss, of questions, of a love that had stretched across an ocean and now, finally, brought her here, beneath a Flanders sky that was, at last, silent. Chapter 8. The Spy's Gambit. Eleanor's hands trembled as she held the wooden box, the cursed diamond ring glinting ominously in the dim light filtering through the ruined chapel. The accompanying letter, Patrick's final message, promised to unlock the truth that had eluded her for so long. She carefully unfolded the brittle paper, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. "My dearest Ellie," the letter began, Patrick's handwriting shaky but recognizable. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the worst has come to pass. I know this may be difficult to understand, but there are things about my family, about my grandfather, that I have only recently discovered, things that have placed me and now you in great danger." Eleanor's breath hitched. He had known. He'd been aware of the danger, of the dark legacy of the ring. "The ring, the one I gave you, is not what it seems. It is not merely a family heirloom. It is a stolen treasure, a diamond taken from a Boer farmer during the war. My grandfather, Captain Alistair Doyle, was a corrupt man. He used his position to enrich himself, to betray his own men, to commit acts that I can barely bring myself to write." Eleanor's mind flashed back to the letter she'd found in the library, the account of Captain Doyle's treachery. Patrick's words confirmed the story, adding a layer of personal anguish to the historical account. "I discovered the truth only recently," the letter continued. "A fellow soldier, a man named Thomas Ashton, recognized the ring. He'd served with my grandfather in South Africa. He knew the story of the stolen diamond, of the betrayal, of the curse that was said to follow it. A new name, Thomas Ashton. A key to the puzzle, perhaps? Ashton told me everything. He said my grandfather had been haunted by his actions, by the guilt of what he'd done. He tried to return the diamond, but it was too late. The damage was done. The curse had taken hold." Eleanor shivered. A curse. A superstitious notion, perhaps, but in the context of the war, of the senseless death and destruction, it felt chillingly plausible. "Ashton warned me. He said the ring brought nothing but bad luck, that it was tainted by blood. He urged me to get rid of it, to break the cycle of violence and greed. But I couldn't. I felt responsible. I felt I had to atone for my grandfather's sins, to somehow make amends for the lives he destroyed." Eleanor understood. Patrick's sense of honor, his unwavering devotion to duty, would have compelled him to seek redemption, to right the wrongs of his family's past. "I planned to return the diamond after the war," the letter continued. "To find the descendants of the Boer farmer and give it back to them. To try to restore some semblance of justice. But I fear it is too late." Eleanor's eyes scanned the final lines of the letter, her heart sinking with each word. "Ashton has disappeared. I believe he was silenced. And I fear I am next. There are those who know about the diamond, who want it for themselves. They are powerful, ruthless. They will stop at nothing to get it." The next words were smeared, almost illegible. "The bird. Watch for the. They are." The letter ended abruptly, the final sentence unfinished. Eleanor stared at the letter, her mind racing. Ashton, silenced. Patrick, fearing for his life. A powerful, ruthless enemy, seeking the diamond. The bird a symbol of that enemy? Suddenly, a noise outside the chapel startled her. A twig snapping, a footstep on the gravel. She quickly closed the box, hiding it under her coat. She stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. She peered through a gap in the crumbling wall, her eyes scanning the overgrown field. She saw him, a man, standing in the shadows, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his posture menacing. He was looking directly at the chapel. He knew she was here. He knew about the diamond. Fear gripped her, a cold, paralyzing terror.
She was trapped.
Alone, unarmed, facing an enemy she didn't understand, an enemy who had already killed once, perhaps twice. She had to escape. She had to get away.
But how?
She looked around the chapel, her eyes desperately searching for a way out. There was a small, broken window at the back, partially hidden by overgrown vines. It was her only chance. She waited, her breath held, until the man moved, his back momentarily turned. Then she made her move. She slipped through the window, the vines scratching her skin, her heart pounding in her chest. She ran, blindly, through the overgrown field. The image of the man, his menacing figure, burned into her mind. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away, to escape the clutches of the enemy who sought the cursed diamond, the enemy who had silenced Ashton, the enemy who had, she now believed, murdered Patrick. The enemy whose symbol was a bird of prey, hunting her down. She ran as if the hounds of hell and the ghosts of the psalm were at her heels. Chapter 9. Promises in the Ruins. Eleanor ran, blindly, desperately, through the overgrown fields surrounding the ruined chapel. The image of the menacing figure burned into her mind. The weight of the wooden box, hidden beneath her coat, felt like a leaden burden, a constant reminder of the danger she was in. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away, to escape the clutches of the man who sought the cursed diamond. She had to find safety, to find someone she could trust, to find a way to unravel the mystery that had cost Patrick his life. She stumbled, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her legs aching with exertion. She looked back, fearing to see the man pursuing her, but the field was empty, the only sound the rustling of the wind through the tall grass. She continued to run, until she reached a small, dirt road, a signpost pointing towards a nearby village. She followed the road, her pace slowing, her mind racing. She needed help. She needed to find someone who could help her, someone who knew about the war, about the secrets of the past. She remembered Sister Mary Agnes mentioning a name during their conversation in Arlington. A British officer, a Major Davies, who had served with Patrick in the final months of the war. She'd said he was a good man, a trustworthy man, a man who had been close to Patrick. Could he help her? Could he shed any light on Patrick's death, on the mystery of the diamond? It was a long shot, but it was the only lead she had. She had to find him. She reached the village, a small, quiet collection of houses, its inhabitants still reeling from the aftermath of the war. She asked around, inquiring about Major Davies, showing his name, written on a scrap of paper she'd taken from her room. She was met with blank stares, shrugs, shakes of the head. No one seemed to know him. She was about to give up, to despair of ever finding him, when an old woman, sitting on a bench outside a small cafe, spoke up. "Major Davies?" she said, her voice raspy with age. "He's not here anymore. He left after the war. Went back to England, I believe." Eleanor's heart sank.
England.
Another journey, another obstacle. But the old woman continued, her eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. He left something behind. A message. For anyone who might come looking for him. Eleanor's heart leaped with hope. A message? What kind of message? The old woman pointed towards a small, crumbling building across the street, its windows boarded up, its door hanging precariously on its hinges. "The old post office," she said. "He left it there, with the postmaster. Said it was important." Eleanor thanked the old woman, her heart pounding with anticipation. She crossed the street, her steps hurried, her mind racing. She entered the post office, the air thick with dust and the scent of decay. The room was empty, The only furniture a broken counter, a pile of scattered letters. She found the postmaster, a frail, elderly man, his face etched with wrinkles, his eyes filled with a weary sadness. She showed him Major Davies's name, explaining her connection to Patrick, her search for the truth. The postmaster listened patiently, his expression unreadable. He then reached under the counter and from a dusty shelf removed a small, sealed envelope, Eleanor's name written on the front in a bold, unfamiliar hand. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The message. From Major Davies. She took the envelope, her hands trembling. She thanked the postmaster, her voice choked with emotion. She stepped outside, into the sunlight, the envelope clutched in her hand. She sat on a bench, her heart pounding in her chest. She carefully opened the envelope, the seal breaking with a soft, ripping sound. She unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning the words, her mind racing. Eleanor Gibson, the letter began, the handwriting strong and decisive. If you are reading this, then you have found your way to Amiens, and you are seeking answers about Patrick Doyle's death. I know who you are. Patrick spoke of you often. He loved you deeply. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears.
Patrick.
His name, written in another man's hand, brought a fresh wave of grief, a renewed sense of loss. I also know about the ring, the letter continued, about the diamond, about the danger you are in. Eleanor's breath hitched. He knew everything. Patrick discovered the truth about his grandfather's past shortly before he died. He confided in me. He asked for my help. He wanted to return the diamond, to atone for his family's sins. Eleanor's mind flashed back to Patrick's letter, his desperate plea for help, his fear for his life. I tried to help him, the letter continued, but it was too late. He was killed before we could act. I believe he was murdered by those who sought the diamond, the same people who are now looking for you. The letter went on, naming an organization, identifying its symbol, and giving its history. It spoke of betrayal and greed and a desperate desire to keep the diamond. Eleanor, you are in great danger. But the diamond belongs with its true owners. You must continue Patrick's work.
You must go to.
And the letter named a location, gave instructions. I will meet you there. Trust no one. The enemy has eyes everywhere. Eleanor folded the letter, her mind reeling. Major Davies. He was alive. He knew the truth. And he was willing to help her. She had an ally. She wasn't alone. She looked around at the quiet village, at the faces of the people, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. She couldn't stay here. She had to leave. She had to follow Major Davies's instructions. She had to continue Patrick's work. She had to find the descendants of the Boer farmer. She had to return the diamond. She had to fulfill the promise that Patrick had made in the ruins of the chapel, the promise that had cost him his life, the promise that was now hers to keep, to honor, to fulfill. Chapter 10. The Cost of Courage. The journey to the location specified in Major Davies's letter was fraught with peril, a constant sense of being watched, of being hunted, weighing heavily on Eleanor. She traveled by night, avoiding the main roads, relying on the kindness of strangers, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The wooden box, containing the cursed diamond and Patrick's final letter, was her constant companion, a tangible reminder of the dangerous task she had undertaken. She arrived at the destination, a remote farmhouse nestled in the rolling hills of the French countryside, its windows dark, its surroundings silent. She approached cautiously, her senses on high alert, her hand instinctively reaching for the small knife she'd concealed in her boot. She knocked on the door, a soft, hesitant rap. There was no answer. She knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. She tried the door handle. It was unlocked. She pushed the door open, slowly, cautiously, stepping inside, the darkness enveloping her. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. The farmhouse was deserted, its furniture covered in sheets, its rooms empty. She called out, her voice echoing in the silence. Major Davies? Are you here? No answer. She searched the house room by room, her heart sinking with each empty space. He wasn't here. He hadn't come. She was about to give up, to despair of ever finding him, when she noticed something. A small, flickering light in one of the back rooms, a faint glow emanating from under the door. She approached cautiously, her hand on the knife, her heart pounding in her chest. She pushed the door open, slowly, revealing a small, sparsely furnished room, lit by a single candle. And there, sitting at a table his back to the door, was a man. "Major Davies?" she said, her voice trembling. The man turned, his face illuminated by the candlelight. It was him. Older, his hair grayer, his face lined with wrinkles, but his eyes, a clear, unwavering blue, held the same intensity she remembered from Sister Mary Agnes's description. He smiled, a weary smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Eleanor Gibson," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "You made it. I was beginning to think you wouldn't." Relief washed over her, a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. She wasn't alone. She had found him. I was afraid," she said, her voice choked with emotion. I thought something had happened to you." He nodded, his expression grim. "Something did happen, Eleanor. Something terrible." He gestured towards a chair.
"Sit down.
"We have much to discuss." Eleanor sat, her gaze fixed on his face, her mind racing. What had happened? What was the terrible thing he was talking about? He began to speak, his voice low and measured, his words painting a picture of betrayal, of deception, of a conspiracy that reached far beyond the battlefields of the Somme. He told her about the organization, the secret society that sought the diamond, the society whose symbol was the bird of prey. He told her about their history, their power, their ruthlessness. He told her about Thomas Ashton, the soldier who had known the truth about Patrick's grandfather, the soldier who had been silenced. He'd been murdered, his body found in a ditch near Amiens, a single feather, the symbol of the bird of prey, placed on his chest. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Ashton. Murdered. Just like Patrick. They knew about Patrick's plan to return the diamond, Major Davies continued. They knew he was a threat. They silenced him, just like they silenced Ashton. He paused, his gaze fixed on the candle flame, his face etched with grief and anger. I tried to protect him, Eleanor. I tried to warn him, but it was too late. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She remembered Patrick's letter, his fear, his desperation. He'd known he was in danger, but he'd been willing to risk everything to atone for his family's sins. I made a mistake, Major Davies said, his voice filled with self-reproach. I underestimated them. I thought I could outsmart them. But they're everywhere. They have eyes and ears in every corner of the world. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and determination. You are in great danger, Eleanor. They know you have the diamond. They will stop at nothing to get it. Eleanor's hand instinctively went to the wooden box, hidden beneath her coat. The cursed diamond. The source of all this pain, all this suffering. What do we do? She asked, her voice trembling. We finish what Patrick started, Major Davies said, his voice firm, resolute. We return the diamond to its rightful owners. We expose the organization, we bring them to justice. We break the cycle of violence and greed. He paused, his gaze softening. It won't be easy, Eleanor. It will be dangerous. But we have to try. We owe it to Patrick. We owe it to all those who have suffered because of this cursed diamond. Eleanor nodded, her heart filled with a newfound determination. She would not be afraid. She would not back down. She would honor Patrick's memory. She would fight for justice. I'm ready, she said, her voice strong, unwavering. Tell me what we need to do. Major Davies smiled, a genuine smile this time, a smile that reached his eyes. That's the spirit, Eleanor. That's the spirit Patrick saw in you. The spirit that made him love you so deeply. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, folded piece of paper.
A map.
A map of South Africa. The descendants of the Boer farmer, he said, his finger tracing a line on the map. They live here in a small village near Pretoria. We need to go there. We need to return the diamond. We need to end this, once and for all. Eleanor looked at the map, her heart pounding in her chest. Another journey, another dangerous undertaking. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had Major Davies by her side. And she had the memory of Patrick, his love, his courage, guiding her, strengthening her, giving her the resolve to face whatever lay ahead. The cost of courage was high, she knew, but the price of silence was even higher. And she was no longer willing to be silent. Chapter 11. A Dance in the Dark. The journey to South Africa was a clandestine affair, a delicate dance of shadows and deception. Major Davies, using his old military contacts, arranged for passage on a cargo ship, posing as a wealthy businessman and his niece. Eleanor, adopting the persona of a quiet, unassuming companion, kept to herself, her senses on high alert, the wooden box containing the cursed diamond hidden amongst her meager belongings. The voyage was long and arduous, the endless expanse of the ocean mirroring the uncertainty of their mission. The ship, a creaking, rust bucket of a vessel, was filled with a motley crew of sailors and travelers, their faces a mixture of suspicion and indifference. Eleanor and Major Davies kept their distance from the other passengers, speaking in hushed tones, their conversations guarded, their eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. They knew the organization, the society with the bird of prey as its symbol, had eyes and ears everywhere. They couldn't afford to be careless. During the long days at sea, Major Davies shared more about his past, about his friendship with Patrick, about his own involvement in the war. He spoke of the horrors he'd witnessed, the friends he'd lost, the guilt he carried. He also spoke of the organization, revealing more about their reach, their influence, their ruthless methods. They were a powerful, shadowy entity with a history stretching back centuries, their tentacles reaching into the highest echelons of power. They are like a hydra, he said, his voice grim. You cut off one head, and two more grow back. They are everywhere and nowhere. They are the masters of manipulation, of deception. They control the flow of information, of wealth, of power. Eleanor shivered. The enemy they faced was formidable, a force that seemed almost impossible to defeat. But they have a weakness, Major Davies continued, his eyes gleaming with a hint of defiance. They are arrogant. They believe they are invincible. They underestimate their opponents. And that, Eleanor, is where we have an advantage. He explained his plan, a carefully crafted strategy to return the diamond, to expose the organization, to bring them to justice. It was a risky plan, a dangerous gamble, but it was their only chance. As the ship approached Cape Town, the tension between them grew. They knew the danger was increasing with every passing mile. They were entering the lion's den, the heart of the organization's territory. They disembarked under the cover of darkness, slipping away unnoticed, blending into the bustling crowds of the port city. They secured a small, inconspicuous car and began the long drive to Pretoria, to the village where the descendants of the Boer farmer lived. The landscape of South Africa was a stark contrast to the rolling fields of France, the bustling streets of Arlington. It was a land of vast open spaces, of rugged mountains, of scorching deserts. A land of beauty and danger, of ancient secrets and hidden truths. As they drove, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being followed. She kept glancing in the rearview mirror, her eyes scanning the road behind them, her hand instinctively reaching for the knife she'd concealed in her boot. They know we're here, Major Davies said, his voice low and tense. They know we have the diamond. They're just waiting for the right moment to strike. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. She knew he was right. They were walking a tightrope. One wrong step could send them plummeting into the abyss. They reached the outskirts of Pretoria, the city sprawling before them, a mix of colonial architecture and modern buildings. They checked into a small, unassuming hotel, using false names, their movements cautious, their eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. That evening, Major Davies arranged a meeting, a secret rendezvous with a contact, a man who could help them locate the descendants of the Boer farmer. The meeting was to take place in a dimly lit bar, a smoky, crowded establishment on the edge of town. A place where secrets were whispered, where deals were made, where danger lurked in every shadow. They entered the bar, the air thick with the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke. The room was filled with a mix of locals and foreigners, their faces a blur of anonymity. They found a table in a dark corner, their backs to the wall, their eyes constantly scanning the room. They waited, their nerves on edge, the tension palpable. A man approached their table, his face obscured by the shadows. He was tall, thin, his eyes cold and calculating. "Major Davies?" he said, his voice a low, guttural rasp. Major Davies nodded, his hand resting on the table, close to a small, concealed pistol. "I have information," the man said. "About the farmer."
About the diamond.
He leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "They know you're here. They know you have it. They're watching you, waiting for you." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. They'd been compromised. Their cover had been blown. Suddenly, the lights went out. The bar was plunged into darkness. Screams erupted, followed by the sound of shattering glass, the thud of bodies.
Chaos reigned.
Eleanor felt a hand grab her arm, pulling her to her feet. "We have to go," Major Davies hissed, his voice urgent.
Now.
They stumbled through the darkness, pushing their way through the panicked crowd, the sounds of fighting echoing around them. They reached the door, bursting out into the night, the cool air a welcome relief from the suffocating chaos of the bar. They ran, blindly, through the dark streets, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. They were being hunted, like prey in a deadly game. A dance in the dark, with the stakes being their very lives. Chapter 12. Betrayal's Shadow. The chase through the darkened streets of Pretoria was a blur of adrenaline and terror. Eleanor and Major Davies, their pursuers close behind, navigated the labyrinthine alleys and shadowy thoroughfares, their hearts pounding, their breaths ragged. The sounds of gunfire and shouting echoed around them, a constant reminder of the deadly game they were caught in. They managed to lose their immediate pursuers, finding temporary refuge in a deserted warehouse, its crumbling walls and broken windows offering a semblance of shelter. They huddled in the darkness, catching their breath, listening for any sign of their enemies. "They knew we were coming," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "They were waiting for us." Major Davies nodded, his face grim. "The contact he betrayed us. He was working for them." Eleanor's blood ran cold. Betrayal. It was a bitter pill to swallow, a stark reminder of the treachery that surrounded them. "Who can we trust?" she asked, her voice filled with despair. "No one," Major Davies replied, his voice hard, resolute. "Except each other." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and determination. "We have to get out of Pretoria. It's too dangerous. They know we're here. They know we have the diamond. They'll be searching for us everywhere." He pulled out the map of South Africa, the one he'd shown her in the farmhouse in France. He pointed to a small, remote village, nestled in the mountains, far from the city. "We need to go there," he said. "It's our only chance. It's where the descendants of the Boer farmer live. It's where we can return the diamond and, hopefully, find some protection." Eleanor nodded, her heart filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Despite the betrayal, despite the danger, she would not give up. She would honor Patrick's memory. She would fulfill her promise. They left the warehouse, under the cover of darkness, slipping back into the streets, their movements cautious, their senses on high alert. They managed to steal a car, an old, battered pickup truck, its engine sputtering and coughing, but it was better than nothing. They drove through the night, the headlights cutting through the darkness, the vast expanse of the South African landscape stretching out before them. They avoided the main roads, sticking to the back roads, their journey slow and arduous. As they drove, Major Davies revealed more about the organization, about their methods, their reach, their insidious influence. He spoke of their network of spies, their informants, their assassins. "They are like a shadow government," he said. "They operate in the darkness, pulling the strings, manipulating events, controlling the flow of power. They are ruthless, efficient, and they have a long memory. Eleanor shivered. The enemy they faced was even more formidable than she'd imagined. But they are not invincible, Major Davies continued, his voice firm, resolute. They have weaknesses. They are overconfident. They underestimate their opponents. And they're divided. There are factions within the organization, vying for power, for control of the diamond. He explained his plan, a revised strategy, adapted to the new circumstances. He intended to exploit the divisions within the organization, to play one faction against another, to create chaos and confusion, to give them an opportunity to return the diamond and escape. It was a dangerous plan, a high-stakes gamble, but it was their only chance. As they approached the village, the sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The landscape changed, from the flat, open plains to the rugged, mountainous terrain. They reached the outskirts of the village, a small, isolated collection of huts, nestled in a valley, surrounded by towering peaks. It was a place of stark beauty, of ancient traditions, of a people who had lived in harmony with the land for centuries. They parked the truck, hiding it behind a cluster of trees. They approached the village on foot, their movements cautious, their eyes scanning their surroundings. They were met by a group of villagers, their faces wary, their eyes filled with suspicion. They were armed with spears and rifles, their posture defensive. Major Davies spoke to them, in a language Eleanor didn't understand, his tone respectful, his gestures conciliatory. He showed them the map, pointing to the village, explaining their mission, their connection to the Boer farmer, to the stolen diamond. The villagers listened, their expressions unreadable. They conferred amongst themselves, their voices hushed, their gazes fixed on Eleanor and Major Davies. Finally, an elder stepped forward, his face wrinkled and weathered, his eyes piercing. He spoke, his voice slow and deliberate, his words translated by Major Davies. "We know of the diamond," he said. "We know of its curse. We have waited long for its return." He looked at Eleanor, his gaze intense, searching. "You carry the spirit of the one who sought to right the wrong," he said. "We will help you." Relief washed over Eleanor, a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. They had found sanctuary. They had found allies. But as the elder spoke, Eleanor noticed a figure lurking in the shadows, at the edge of the village. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. The bird symbol on his jacket. He was here. He'd found them. The betrayal was not in Pretoria. It was here, among the villagers. Someone had led him to them. And as the man stepped forward, raising his hand, Eleanor knew that the cost of courage was about to be paid, once again, in blood. Chapter 13. The Reckoning at Dawn. The man with the bird symbol on his jacket stepped out of the shadows, his hand raised, a glint of metal reflecting the early morning sun. A pistol, aimed directly at Eleanor. Time seemed to slow. Eleanor saw Major Davies react, pushing her behind him, drawing his own weapon, his face a mask of grim determination. She saw the villagers scatter, their shouts of alarm echoing through the valley. She saw the man's finger tighten on the trigger. A shot rang out. But it wasn't from the man's gun. A villager, hidden amongst the huts, had fired his rifle, striking the man in the shoulder. He stumbled, his shot going wild, the bullet whizzing past Eleanor's ear. Major Davies fired, his shot finding its mark, the man crumpling to the ground, the pistol clattering on the dusty earth. Silence descended, broken only by the ragged breathing of Eleanor and Major Davies, the sobs of the villagers. The man lay still, his lifeblood staining the ground, the bird symbol on his jacket a stark reminder of the deadly organization he represented. Major Davies approached the body cautiously, his gun still trained on the fallen man. He checked for a pulse. Nothing. He looked at Eleanor, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and horror. "He's dead," he said, his voice hoarse. "But there will be others. They won't give up." The elder approached, his face etched with sorrow and anger. He spoke to Major Davies, his words translated. "He was one of us," he said. "A traitor. He was paid by the organization to betray us, to lead them to you. Eleanor's heart sank. Betrayal, again. It seemed to follow them, like a shadow, poisoning everything it touched. We must leave, Major Davies said, his voice urgent.
Now.
Before they send more. But the elder shook his head. No, he said. You are safe here. We will protect you. We have waited long for the return of the diamond. We will not let them take it. He gestured towards a group of villagers, armed with rifles and spears. We will fight, he said. We will defend our land, our heritage, our honor. Major Davies hesitated. He knew the danger, the risk. But he also saw the determination in the elder's eyes, the unwavering resolve of the villagers. We stay, he said, his voice firm.
We fight with them.
The villagers, heartened by his words, raised their weapons, their shouts of defiance echoing through the valley. They prepared for battle, fortifying the village, setting traps, posting guards. They knew the organization would come, and they would be ready. Eleanor, despite her fear, felt a surge of adrenaline, a sense of purpose. She would not cower. She would not be afraid. She would stand with these brave people. She would fight for justice. She would honor Patrick's memory. She retrieved the wooden box containing the cursed diamond from the truck. She held it in her hands, the weight of it a tangible reminder of the task before her. She approached the elder, her heart filled with a mixture of gratitude and determination. We are ready, she said, her voice strong, unwavering, to return what was stolen, to end this curse. The elder smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. You have the heart of a warrior, Eleanor Gibson, he said, the spirit of the one who sought to right the wrong.
You are one of us now.
He led her to a small, sacred hut at the center of the village. Inside, a fire burned, casting a warm glow on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of incense and herbs. He placed the diamond on a small, stone altar, its facets glittering in the firelight. He began to chant, his voice low and resonant, his words ancient and powerful. The villagers gathered around, their faces solemn, their eyes fixed on the diamond. They joined in the chant, their voices blending together, creating a powerful, hypnotic rhythm. Eleanor felt a strange sensation, a tingling in her hands, a warmth spreading through her body. She felt connected to these people, to this land, to Patrick's memory. As the chanting reached a crescendo, the sun rose above the mountains, casting a golden light on the village. The sky was clear, the air was still, the silence profound. The reckoning had come. The curse of the diamond, the legacy of betrayal and bloodshed, was about to be lifted. But as the sun climbed higher in the sky, a shadow fell over the village. The sound of engines, the rumble of vehicles, approaching from the distance. The organization had arrived. The final battle was about to begin. And Eleanor knew, with a chilling certainty, that not everyone would survive the dawn. Chapter 14. Across the barbed wire. The approaching vehicles, a convoy of trucks and armored cars, shattered the morning calm, their engines roaring, their tires spitting gravel, their presence a stark reminder of the impending battle. The organization had arrived, determined to reclaim the diamond, to silence Eleanor and Major Davies, to crush the resistance of the villagers. The villagers, armed with their rifles and spears, their faces grim, their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and determination, took their positions, hidden amongst the huts, behind the barricades, their eyes fixed on the approaching enemy. Eleanor and Major Davies stood with the elder, at the center of the village, the wooden box containing the diamond resting on the altar, a symbol of the conflict, of the struggle between good and evil, of the legacy of betrayal and redemption. The convoy stopped at the edge of the village, the vehicles forming a menacing line, their occupants dismounting, their weapons drawn, their faces obscured by helmets and masks. They were a formidable force, well-armed, well-trained, their movements precise, their intentions clear. A man stepped forward, tall, imposing, his voice amplified by a megaphone. "We know you have the diamond," he said, his voice cold, ruthless. "Surrender it, and we will spare your lives. Resist, and you will all die." The elder stepped forward, his face defiant, his voice strong. "We will not surrender," he said. "We will not betray our heritage. We will not yield to your greed." The man laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "You are fools," he said. "You cannot win. We are too powerful. We are everywhere." He raised his hand, a signal to his troops. They opened fire, a hail of bullets ripping through the village, shattering windows, splintering wood, tearing through flesh. The battle had begun. The villagers returned fire, their rifles and spears spitting defiance, their courage unwavering, their determination fueled by centuries of tradition, by a fierce love of their land, by a deep-seated hatred of injustice. Eleanor and Major Davies, taking cover behind the altar, fired their pistols, their shots finding their marks, but the enemy was too numerous, too well-armed. The village was engulfed in chaos, the sounds of gunfire, explosions, screams, filling the air. The ground was littered with bodies, both villagers and organization soldiers, the blood staining the dusty earth. Eleanor, despite her fear, fought with a fierce determination, her heart pounding, her hands trembling, but her aim true. She had come too far, she had lost too much, to give up now. She saw Major Davies, fighting bravely, his face covered in sweat and grime, his clothes torn and bloodied. He was a skilled marksman, a veteran of countless battles, but he was outnumbered, outgunned. She saw the elder, fighting with the strength of his ancestors, his spear finding its mark, his voice chanting ancient prayers, his spirit unbroken. But the organization was relentless, their advance inexorable. They were pushing the villagers back, their superior firepower overwhelming the defenders. Eleanor saw a group of organization soldiers, breaking through the barricades, heading towards the sacred hut, towards the altar, towards the diamond. She knew she had to stop them. She had to protect the diamond. She had to fulfill her promise. She left the cover of the altar, running towards the hut, her pistol blazing, her heart pounding. She shot down 2 soldiers, but there were too many. She reached the hut, just as the soldiers were about to enter. She stood in their way, her body blocking the entrance, her pistol aimed at their leader. "You will not pass," she said, her voice trembling, but firm. "You will not take the diamond." The leader laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "You are one woman," he said, "against many. You cannot stop us." He raised his weapon, aiming it at her heart. Suddenly, a figure appeared behind him, a villager, armed with a spear. He lunged, the spear piercing the leader's back, the man collapsing to the ground, his weapon falling from his grasp. The other soldiers, stunned by the sudden attack, hesitated. Eleanor seized the opportunity, firing her pistol, taking down 2 more. The remaining soldiers, realizing they were outnumbered, retreated, fleeing back towards their vehicles. Eleanor stood there, her body trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had done it. She had stopped them. She had protected the diamond. But the battle was far from over. The organization was still out there, regrouping, planning their next attack. She looked around, at the devastated village, at the bodies of the fallen, at the faces of the survivors, their expressions a mixture of grief and defiance. The cost of courage had been high, but the spirit of resistance remained unbroken. They would continue to fight, to defend their heritage, to protect the diamond, to honor the memory of those who had fallen. They knew that, ultimately, the true battlefield lay not just in the village, or even in South Africa, but across the years, across the oceans and the smoke-filled skies where the ghosts of the Great War still fought, still sought justice. The fight went on, with or without them. Chapter 15. The Heart's Battlefield. The aftermath of the battle was a scene of devastation and resilience. The village, once a haven of peace, was now scarred by violence, its huts riddled with bullet holes, its ground stained with blood. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and death, the silence punctuated by the sobs of the grieving, the murmurs of the wounded. But amidst the destruction, the spirit of the villagers remained unbroken. They tended to their wounded, buried their dead, and began the arduous task of rebuilding their homes, their lives, their community. They had faced the wrath of the organization. They had paid a heavy price, but they had not yielded. They had defended their heritage, their honor, their freedom. Eleanor and Major Davies, exhausted but alive, worked alongside the villagers, offering what assistance they could. They had fought bravely. They had survived the onslaught, but the battle had taken its toll. They were both wounded, physically and emotionally, scarred by the violence they had witnessed, the losses they had endured. As they worked, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling of unease, of impending doom. The organization had been repelled, but they were not defeated. They would be back, she knew, stronger, more determined than ever. She looked at Major Davies, his face etched with worry, his eyes filled with a haunted look. He had aged years in the past few days, the weight of responsibility, of guilt, of loss, pressing down on him. "They won't give up," she said, her voice low, her gaze fixed on his face. "They'll come back for the diamond." He nodded, his expression grim. "I know," he said. "We need to get out of here. We need to find a safe place, to regroup, to plan our next move." But where could they go? The organization had eyes and ears everywhere. They were hunted, like prey in a deadly game. The elder approached them, his face solemn, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "You have fought bravely," he said. "You have honored your promise. But you are not safe here. The organization will return, and they will not show mercy." He paused, his gaze shifting towards the sacred hut, towards the altar, where the diamond rested. "The diamond must be returned," he said, "to its rightful owners,
To the place where it belongs.
Only then will the curse be lifted. Only then will the violence end." He pointed towards a distant mountain range, its peaks shrouded in mist, its slopes covered in dense forest. "There is a place," he said, "a secret place, known only to our people. A place where the diamond was first discovered, a place where it can be returned to the earth, to the ancestors." He offered to guide them, to lead them to this secret place, to help them complete their mission, to end the cycle of violence and greed. It was a dangerous journey, a perilous undertaking, but it was their only hope. They set off at dawn, the following day, leaving the village behind, their hearts heavy with sorrow, but their spirits filled with a renewed sense of purpose. They traveled on foot, following the elder, their movements cautious, their senses on high alert. The journey was arduous, the terrain rugged, the weather unpredictable. They climbed steep slopes, crossed rushing rivers, navigated dense forests, their bodies aching, their minds exhausted. As they traveled, Eleanor and Major Davies grew closer, their bond forged in the crucible of battle, their shared experiences creating a deep connection, a mutual understanding that transcended words. They spoke of their pasts, their hopes, their fears. They shared their grief, their guilt, their regrets. They found solace in each other's company, a sense of comfort in the midst of danger and uncertainty. Eleanor found herself drawn to Major Davies, to his strength, his courage, his unwavering commitment to justice. She saw in him a reflection of Patrick, a similar spirit, a similar dedication to duty, a similar capacity for love. But she also saw the pain in his eyes, the shadows that haunted him, the weight of the past that he carried. She knew he was still grieving, still struggling with the loss of Patrick, with the guilt of his own survival. One evening, as they sat around a small campfire under a star-filled sky, she spoke to him, her voice soft, her gaze filled with compassion. "You blame yourself, don't you?"
she said.
"For Patrick's death, for what happened in the village." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and pain. He didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. "It wasn't your fault," she said. "You did everything you could. You tried to protect him. You tried to help us." He shook his head, his voice hoarse. "I should have done more," he said. "I should have seen it coming. I should have been there." "You can't blame yourself," she said. "You can't change the past. You can only learn from it and move forward." She reached out, her hand touching his, a gesture of comfort, of connection. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a longing, a vulnerability that touched her heart. "You remind me of him, you know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Of Patrick. Your strength, your courage, your compassion." Eleanor's heart ached. She knew he was still in love with the memory of Patrick, still grieving his loss. But she also saw something else in his eyes, something more than just grief, more than just remembrance. She saw a spark of hope, a flicker of desire, a hint of a future that might be possible, a future beyond the battlefield, beyond the pain, beyond the shadow of the cursed diamond. It terrified her and thrilled her, all at once. This internal battlefield, she knew, was one she would have to fight alone. Chapter 16. Scars of Remembrance. The journey to the secret place, the ancestral home of the diamond, was a pilgrimage of both physical and emotional endurance. The rugged terrain, the ever-present danger, and the weight of their mission tested Eleanor and Major Davies, pushing them to their limits. But it also brought them closer, forging a bond of shared experience, of mutual respect, of a growing affection that neither could deny. The elder, their guide, led them through a hidden path, a treacherous trail that wound its way through the mountains, a landscape of breathtaking beauty and perilous challenges. He shared stories of his people, of their history, of their connection to the land, of the legend of the diamond. The diamond, he said, was a gift from the earth, a symbol of our connection to the ancestors. But it was stolen, taken by greed, used for violence. It became cursed, tainted by blood, a source of suffering and strife. He explained that the diamond had to be returned to its original resting place, to a sacred cave, high in the mountains, where it could be cleansed, purified, its negative energy dissipated. Only then would the curse be lifted, only then would peace be restored. As they climbed higher, the air grew thinner, the temperature dropped, the landscape became more barren, more desolate. The journey was taking its toll, both physically and emotionally. Eleanor, despite her strength, felt the fatigue, the pain, the weight of the past pressing down on her. She thought of Patrick, of his love, of his sacrifice. She thought of the ring, of the cursed diamond, of the violence it had unleashed. She looked at Major Davies, his face etched with exhaustion, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and weariness. He was carrying his own burdens, his own scars, the memories of the war, the loss of his friend, the guilt he felt for his own survival. One evening, as they rested near a small stream, the setting sun casting a golden glow on the surrounding peaks, Eleanor spoke to him, her voice soft, her gaze filled with empathy. "You still carry the war with you, don't you?" she said. "The memories, the pain, the guilt." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames of the campfire. He didn't answer, but his silence was an acknowledgement. "I understand," she said. "I carry my own scars. The loss of Patrick, the horrors of the hospital, the fear, the uncertainty." She paused, her gaze shifting towards the distant mountains, their peaks shrouded in mist. "We all carry scars," she said. "Visible and invisible. Reminders of what we've been through, of what we've lost, of what we've survived." She looked back at him, her eyes meeting his. "But scars are not weaknesses," she said. "They are signs of strength. They are proof that we have lived, that we have fought, that we have endured." She reached out, her hand gently touching his arm, a gesture of comfort, of connection. "We can't erase the past," she said. "We can't undo the pain. But we can learn from it. We can grow from it. We can find a way to heal, to move forward." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a gratitude, a vulnerability that touched her heart. "You're right," he said, his voice hoarse. "We can't change the past, but we can shape the future." He paused, his gaze shifting towards the stream, the water reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said about Patrick, about the possibility of a future." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. She knew what he was going to say, and she was both terrified and exhilarated. "I know I can never replace him," he said. I know I can never erase the love you had for him, but I care for you, Eleanor.
Deeply.
And I hope that maybe someday there might be a chance for us. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She had longed to hear those words, but she was also afraid of betraying Patrick's memory, afraid of opening herself up to more pain, more loss. I don't know, she said, her voice trembling. It's too soon. I need time. He nodded, understanding. I know, he said. I'll wait. As long as it takes. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his thumb wiping away a tear. You are a remarkable woman, Eleanor Gibson, he said. Strong, courageous, compassionate. Patrick was a lucky man to have known you. And I am honored to be in your presence. His words, his touch, his gaze, sent a wave of warmth through her, a feeling of hope, of possibility, of a future that might be brighter than she had dared to imagine. The scars of remembrance were still there, the pain of the past still lingered, but they were no longer the defining features of her life. They were reminders of what she had overcome, of what she had survived, of what she was capable of. And in the shared scars of the man beside her, she began to find a sense of peace, the possibility of a love that could heal, that could rebuild, that could transcend the horrors of the past. The heart's battlefield was still contested, but a truce, perhaps even a victory, seemed, for the first time, within reach. Chapter 17. A Love Forged in Fire. The final ascent to the sacred cave was the most challenging part of their journey. The path was steep and treacherous, the air thin and cold, the wind howling like a banshee. They climbed slowly, painstakingly, their bodies aching, their lungs burning, their determination fueled by the hope of completing their mission, of ending the curse of the diamond. The elder led the way, his aged body surprisingly agile, his knowledge of the mountain their lifeline. He chanted ancient prayers, his voice echoing through the desolate landscape, his spirit unwavering. Eleanor and Major Davies followed, supporting each other, their shared struggle forging an even stronger bond between them. They had confessed their feelings, their hopes, their fears, and now, they faced the final challenge together, their hearts intertwined, their destinies linked. As they reached the summit, the clouds parted, revealing a breathtaking view of the surrounding mountains, their peaks bathed in the golden light of the rising sun. The sacred cave, a dark opening in the rock face, awaited them, its entrance shrouded in mist, its depths holding the secrets of the past. They entered the cave, their footsteps echoing in the silence, their hearts pounding with anticipation. The air was cool and damp, the darkness profound, the only light emanating from the torches carried by the elder. The cave was vast, its walls adorned with ancient paintings, its floor covered in smooth stones. In the center of the cave, a natural spring bubbled up from the ground, its water crystal clear, its sound a gentle murmur. The elder led them to the spring, his movements reverent, his voice hushed. He placed the wooden box containing the diamond on a flat stone, near the water's edge. He began to chant, his voice echoing through the cave, his words ancient and powerful. He spoke of the diamond, of its origins, of its journey, of its curse. He prayed to the ancestors, asking for their forgiveness, for their guidance, for their blessing. He then took the diamond from the box, holding it up to the light, its facets sparkling, its dark heart pulsing with a strange energy. He walked to the spring, his movements slow and deliberate. He knelt down and gently placed the diamond in the water, releasing it back to the earth, to the ancestors, to the source of its creation. The diamond sank to the bottom of the spring, disappearing from sight. The water rippled, then became still, reflecting the light of the torches, its surface clear and calm. The elder stood up, his face serene, his eyes filled with peace. "It is done," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The curse is lifted. The diamond is returned. The balance is restored." Eleanor and Major Davies looked at each other, their hearts filled with a sense of relief, of completion, of gratitude. They had done it. They had fulfilled their promise, They had honored Patrick's memory. They had ended the cycle of violence and greed. As they stood there, in the silence of the cave, a sense of peace washed over them, a feeling of tranquility they hadn't experienced in years. The weight of the past, the burden of the curse, had been lifted. Major Davies reached out, taking Eleanor's hand, his touch gentle, his gaze filled with love. "We did it, Eleanor," he said, his voice soft, his eyes shining with emotion. "Together." Eleanor nodded, her heart overflowing with love for this man, this brave, compassionate, honorable man who had stood by her side, who had shared her struggles, who had helped her find her way back to the light. "Together," she echoed, her voice filled with emotion. They left the cave, stepping out into the sunlight, the world seeming brighter, clearer, more hopeful than ever before. The curse was lifted, the past was behind them, and a new future, a future filled with love, with peace, with possibility, stretched out before them. As they descended the mountain, hand in hand, they knew their journey was far from over. The organization was still out there, their power diminished, but their threat still real. They would have to face them, to expose their crimes, to bring them to justice. But they were no longer alone. They had each other. They had the support of the villagers. They had the memory of Patrick, guiding them, inspiring them, strengthening them. And they had a love forged in fire, a love tested by adversity, a love that had blossomed amidst the ruins of war, a love that would endure, that would conquer, that would heal. This love, they both knew, was not a replacement for what had been lost, but a testament to the resilience of the human heart, its capacity to find hope even in the darkest of times, to build anew on the foundations of grief and loss. It was a love born not of innocence, but of shared scars, of mutual understanding, of a profound respect for the battles they had both fought, both together and alone. It was, in its own way, a miracle. Chapter 18. The Long Road Home. Leaving the sanctuary of the mountain village, Eleanor and Major Davies embarked on the next phase of their journey, bringing the organization to justice and securing their own future. The return of the diamond had lifted a personal burden, but the larger threat remained, a shadow lurking over their newfound peace. They traveled back to Pretoria, moving with caution, aware that the organization's reach extended far and wide. Major Davies, using his remaining contacts within the military and intelligence communities, began to gather evidence, meticulously documenting the organization's crimes, their network of influence, and their involvement in Patrick's death and Ashton's murder. Eleanor, meanwhile, worked to verify the information, cross-referencing it with Patrick's letters, with the accounts of the villagers, with the historical records she'd uncovered in Arlington. The picture that emerged was one of a deeply entrenched, ruthlessly efficient organization, involved in everything from arms dealing and smuggling to political manipulation and assassination. They knew they needed to expose the organization publicly, to bring their crimes to light, to dismantle their network of power. But they also knew that doing so would be incredibly dangerous. The organization would not hesitate to silence them permanently. They decided to leak the information to a trusted journalist, a man named Robert Macmillan, who worked for a reputable London newspaper. Macmillan had a reputation for integrity, for courage, for exposing corruption and injustice. Major Davies arranged a secret meeting with Macmillan in a secluded location outside Pretoria. They presented him with the evidence they'd gathered, the documents, the testimonies, the proof of the organization's crimes. Macmillan was initially skeptical, but as he reviewed the evidence, his skepticism turned to shock, then to outrage. He realized the magnitude of the story, the potential impact it could have, the danger it posed. "This is explosive," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "This could bring down governments, topple empires. But it could also get you killed." Major Davies nodded, his expression grim.
"We know the risks," he said.
"But we can't stay silent. We have to expose them. We have to stop them." Macmillan agreed to publish the story, but he warned them that it would take time, that he needed to verify the information, to protect his sources, to ensure the story was airtight. "This will be a long, hard fight," he said. "They will come after you, with everything they've got. You need to be prepared. Eleanor and Major Davies understood the danger, but they were resolute. They had come too far, they had lost too much, to back down now. They left Pretoria, traveling under assumed names, moving from place to place, staying one step ahead of the organization. They knew they were being hunted, that their lives were on the line, but they refused to be intimidated. The publication of the story, when it finally happened, was a bombshell. It rocked the world, exposing the organization's crimes, their network of influence, their ruthless methods. Governments were shaken, investigations were launched, arrests were made. The organization, caught off guard, retaliated fiercely. They denied the allegations, they launched smear campaigns, they threatened Macmillan. They tried to suppress the story. But it was too late. The truth was out. Eleanor and Major Davies, watching the events unfold from afar, felt a sense of vindication, of justice, of closure. They had done it. They had exposed the organization. They had avenged Patrick's death. They had honored his memory. But they also knew that the fight was not over. The organization was wounded, but not defeated. They would regroup, they would seek revenge, they would continue their nefarious activities. Eleanor and Major Davies decided to return to England, to continue their work, to assist in the investigations, to ensure that the organization was brought to justice. They knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but they were ready. They had each other. They had the truth on their side. And they had a love forged in fire, a love that would sustain them, that would guide them, that would give them the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They had a long road home, both literally and figuratively, but they would walk it together, hand in hand, their hearts filled with hope, with courage, with a love that had transcended the scars of war and the shadow of betrayal. The journey was not over, but they were no longer afraid. Chapter 19. Unveiling the Past. Returning to England felt like stepping back into a world both familiar and profoundly changed. The war's shadows still lingered, but life had moved on, rebuilding itself around the scars. For Eleanor and Major Davies, however, the return was not a homecoming, but a continuation of their fight, a new chapter in their quest for justice. They settled in a quiet village in the Cotswolds, far from the bustling streets of London, but close enough to stay connected to the ongoing investigations. Major Davies, using his military contacts, worked closely with the authorities, providing them with crucial information, helping them unravel the complex web of the organization's activities. Eleanor, meanwhile, focused on supporting Robert Macmillan, the journalist who had broken the story. She helped him navigate the legal challenges, the threats, the attempts to discredit his work. She also began to write her own account of her experiences, a personal memoir that would tell the story of Patrick, of the cursed diamond, of the love that had blossomed amidst the ruins of war. The investigations were progressing slowly, painstakingly. The organization, though weakened, was still fighting back, using their influence, their wealth, their network of contacts to obstruct justice, to protect their members, to silence their critics. Eleanor and Major Davies faced constant threats, intimidation, attempts to discredit them. They knew they were walking a dangerous path, but they refused to be deterred. They were driven by a sense of duty, by a commitment to justice, by a love for each other that had grown stronger with each passing day. One evening, as they sat by the fire in their small cottage, sharing a quiet meal, Major Davies received a phone call. It was from one of his contacts in the intelligence community, a man he trusted implicitly. "We've made a breakthrough," the contact said, his voice urgent. "We've identified the leader of the organization, the mastermind behind it all." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. The leader. The one who had orchestrated Patrick's death, Ashton's murder, the attacks on the village. "Who is it?" Major Davies asked, his voice tense. The contact hesitated.
It's someone you know," he said.
"Someone you trust." Eleanor and Major Davies exchanged a look of disbelief, of shock. Someone they knew? Someone they trusted? The contact revealed the name, a name that sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. A name that shattered her world, that turned her understanding of the past upside down. It was Sister Mary Agnes, the head nurse at the field hospital. The woman who had been Eleanor's confidant, her rock, her source of strength during the darkest days of the war. The woman who had told her the story of Patrick's death, of the ring, of the curse. It couldn't be true. It had to be a mistake. But the contact was adamant. He had irrefutable proof, documents, recordings, testimonies. Sister Mary Agnes was not who she seemed to be. She was a master manipulator, a skilled deceiver, a ruthless leader of a criminal organization. Eleanor's mind reeled. Everything she thought she knew, everything she believed, was crumbling around her. The woman she had trusted, the woman she had confided in, was her enemy. Major Davies, seeing her distress, reached out, taking her hand, his touch firm, reassuring. "We'll get through this, Eleanor," he said, his voice filled with compassion. "Together, we'll uncover the truth. We'll bring her to justice." Eleanor nodded, but her heart was heavy with a sense of betrayal, of disillusionment. The past, it seemed, was a labyrinth of secrets, of lies, of hidden agendas. They decided to confront Sister Mary Agnes, to demand answers, to expose her crimes. They knew it would be dangerous, that she would not hesitate to use violence, to protect herself. But they had to do it. For Patrick, for Ashton, for the villagers, for all those who had suffered at the hands of the organization. For themselves. They traveled back to Arlington, to St. Anne's Convent, the place where their journey had begun, the place where the truth, they hoped, would finally be revealed. The weight of the past, the burden of betrayal, pressed down on them, but they were determined to face it, to overcome it, to find a way to heal, to move forward. The unveiling of the past was about to begin, and Eleanor knew, with a sinking heart, that it would be more painful, more shocking, than she could ever have imagined. Chapter 20. Redemption's Embrace. The return to St. Anne's Convent was a journey into the heart of darkness, a confrontation with the past that Eleanor dreaded and yet knew was necessary. The familiar stone walls, the scent of roses and beeswax, the quiet serenity that had once offered her solace, now felt menacing, tainted by the revelation of Sister Mary Agnes's treachery. Eleanor and Major Davies arrived at the convent under the pretense of a routine visit, their true intentions hidden, their hearts pounding with a mixture of apprehension and determination. They were greeted by a young nun, her face innocent and unsuspecting, who led them to the same small parlor where Eleanor had first sought Sister Mary Agnes's help, months ago. Sister Mary Agnes entered, her presence filling the room with a familiar authority, but this time, Eleanor saw it differently. She saw the deception in her eyes, the calculation in her movements, the ruthlessness hidden beneath her wimple. "Eleanor," she said, her voice soft, her expression seemingly welcoming. "It's good to see you again. And Major Davies, a pleasure to meet you." Major Davies nodded, his expression guarded, his hand resting on the small pistol concealed beneath his jacket. "We need to talk, sister," Eleanor said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "About the organization. About the diamond. About Patrick." Sister Mary Agnes's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something surprise, perhaps, or annoyance crossed her eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about, Eleanor," she said, her voice calm, controlled. "Don't lie to us, sister," Major Davies said, his voice hard. "We know the truth. We know about your involvement, about your leadership." Sister Mary Agnes sighed, a weary sound that seemed almost genuine. "Very well," she said. "You've discovered my secret. But it's not what you think." She began to speak, her voice low and measured, her words weaving a tale of intrigue, of betrayal, of a past far more complex than Eleanor could have imagined. She explained that she had been born into the organization, that her family had been involved for generations. She had been raised to believe in its ideals, to serve its goals, to protect its interests. But she had also witnessed its cruelty, its ruthlessness, its corruption. She had seen the lives it had destroyed, the suffering it had caused. She had tried to change it, from within, to reform it, to steer it towards a different path. But she had failed. The organization was too powerful, too entrenched, too resistant to change. She had then decided to use her position to undermine it, to sabotage its operations, to protect its victims. She had used her role as a nurse to help wounded soldiers, to provide them with comfort, with information, with a way to escape. She had helped Patrick, she said, because she saw in him a kindred spirit, a man of honor, a man who wanted to do what was right. She had given him the information about his grandfather, about the diamond, about the organization. She had known the danger, she said, but she had hoped that Patrick could succeed where she had failed. She had hoped that he could expose the organization, that he could bring them to justice. But she had underestimated the organization's reach, their ruthlessness. They had discovered Patrick's intentions, and they had silenced him. She had then tried to protect Eleanor, to guide her, to help her complete Patrick's mission. She had manipulated her, yes, but it was for her own good, she said, to keep her safe, to lead her towards the truth. Eleanor listened, her mind reeling, her heart torn between disbelief and a grudging acceptance. Could it be true? Could Sister Mary Agnes, the woman she had trusted, be both her enemy and her ally? Why didn't you tell me? Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. Why all the lies, the deception? Sister Mary Agnes looked at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and regret. I couldn't risk it, she said. The organization had eyes and ears everywhere. I had to protect you, to protect myself. I had to play the game, to maintain my cover, to survive. She paused, her gaze shifting towards Major Davies. And I knew, she added, that you would need someone you could trust completely. Someone beyond suspicion. Major Davies, who had been silent throughout her explanation, finally spoke. And the man in South Africa? He asked. The one who attacked us? Sister Mary Agnes nodded. He was a rogue element, she said. A faction within the organization that wanted the diamond for themselves. I tried to stop them, but I failed. It was a complex, convoluted story. A tale of double lives, of hidden agendas, of a struggle between good and evil that blurred the lines between right and wrong. Eleanor didn't know what to believe. She wanted to trust Sister Mary Agnes, to believe in her redemption, but the scars of betrayal ran deep. I need proof, Eleanor said, her voice firm. I need evidence, something concrete, to convince me that you're telling the truth. Sister Mary Agnes nodded, understanding. She reached into a hidden pocket in her habit, pulling out a small, leather-bound book. This is my diary, she said. It contains everything. My true identity, my work within the organization, my attempts to undermine them, my efforts to help Patrick, to protect you. She handed the diary to Eleanor, her hand trembling. Read it, she said, and then decide for yourself. Eleanor took the diary, its weight heavy in her hands. It was the key, the final piece of the puzzle, the answer to all her questions. She looked at Major Davies, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. They had come full circle, back to the beginning, to the place where their journey had started. They left the convent, the diary clutched in Eleanor's hand, the truth waiting to be revealed, the future uncertain, but filled with a glimmer of hope, of redemption, of a love that had survived the trials of war, of betrayal, of a past that had finally been unveiled. The final act was upon them, and Eleanor knew that whatever the diary revealed, she and Major Davies would face it together, their bond stronger than ever, their love a beacon in the darkness. The embrace of redemption, whether for Sister Mary Agnes or for themselves, was at hand. Epilogue. Eleanor and Major Davies spent weeks poring over Sister Mary Agnes's diary, meticulously verifying its contents, cross-referencing it with other sources, piecing together the complex tapestry of her double life. The diary was a confession, a testament to a woman torn between duty and conscience, between loyalty and betrayal, between the darkness of her upbringing and the flickering light of her own moral compass. It confirmed her story, revealing her efforts to undermine the organization from within, her attempts to help Patrick, her manipulation of Eleanor, all driven by a desperate desire to atone for the sins of her family, to break the cycle of violence and greed. It was a story of courage, of resilience, of a woman fighting a lonely battle against a powerful enemy, using the only weapons she had, her intelligence, her cunning, her faith. The diary also provided crucial evidence that helped the authorities dismantle the organization, leading to arrests, trials, and the eventual downfall of a criminal empire that had operated in the shadows for generations. Sister Mary Agnes, her identity revealed, her actions exposed, was taken into custody, but her cooperation with the authorities, her willingness to testify against her former associates, led to a reduced sentence, a recognition of her complex role in the long and bloody saga. Eleanor, reading the diary, felt a mixture of emotions: anger, betrayal, sadness, but also a grudging admiration, a profound understanding of the choices Sister Mary Agnes had made, the sacrifices she had endured. She realized that the world was not black and white, that good and evil often intertwined, that even the most flawed individuals could be capable of acts of great courage and compassion. With the organization dismantled, the cursed diamond returned to its rightful place, and the truth finally revealed, Eleanor and Major Davies were able to begin rebuilding their lives. They returned to the quiet village in the Cotswolds, their sanctuary, their haven from the storms of the past. They were married in a small, simple ceremony, surrounded by friends, by the villagers who had supported them, by Robert Macmillan, the journalist who had helped them expose the truth. It was a celebration of love, of resilience, of a future free from the shadows of war and betrayal. Eleanor published her memoir, telling the story of Patrick, of the cursed diamond, of her journey of discovery and healing. The book became a bestseller, a testament to the enduring power of love, of courage, of the human spirit. She and Major Davies dedicated their lives to helping others, to supporting veterans, to working for peace, to creating a world where the horrors of war would never be repeated. They found solace in their work, in their love for each other, in the knowledge that they had made a difference, that they had honored the memory of those who had been lost. Years passed, and their love deepened, strengthened by the shared experiences, the trials they had overcome, the bond that had been forged in fire. They had found peace, not in forgetting the past, but in embracing it, in learning from it, in transforming it into a source of strength, of wisdom, of compassion. One evening, as they sat by the fire, their hands clasped together, their hearts filled with gratitude, Eleanor looked at Major Davies, his face etched with the lines of time, his eyes still shining with the love that had sustained them through it all. "We did it," she said, her voice soft, her gaze filled with emotion.
"We survived.
We found our way back to the light." He smiled, a warm, loving smile that reached his eyes.
"Together, Eleanor," he said.
"We did it together." And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet peace of their home, they knew that the scars of the past, though they would always remain, were no longer wounds, but reminders of the battles they had fought, the victories they had won, the love that had conquered all. The long journey had ended, and they had finally found their way home, to each other, to a future filled with hope, with peace, with a love that would endure forever.
The end.